Justin.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm Larry Nelson. I am your presenter today. I've been with SCORE for about 7 years. This is Stan Booth over here. We're doing something a little bit unique today in that we're trying to use a new piece of technology. You see the owl. I don't know if you, yeah, there's eyes on the back of it too. The owl is a device that allows us to reach more people in remote environments. Many people can't attend our workshops, and so what we're trying to do is to utilize this technology. I believe we have 2 people that have logged in already, and so they're going to actually watch what we're doing today, but it's supposed to be interactive for them. So Rick, I know you're on there. Can you unmute and say something to the audience?
Good morning, welcome.
Ah, great. Rick, too, is a SCORE mentor. He's located up in Flower Mound, Texas. Bill Vandergriff, are you on?
I am here in Texas this morning.
In what part of Texas?
Lubbock.
Lubbock, see? There we go. Well, great. I'm glad you're able to join us, Bill. If you could, sign in there and write your name on a tag. Today, what we're going to do is we have a fairly small group here today. There should be 8 of you. We're going to do this one on holding employees accountable. So, but before we do that, I'd like to understand why each of you came to this class. So I'd like each of you, we'll go around the room, just introduce yourself. If you work for a company, who, and what you're looking to gain out of the class today.
My name is Rain McDermott, and my company is Dallas Caramel Company. And I am just trying to be better at holding my employees accountable. So I need to understand what that really entails, to be fair, before, and probably to learn how to be accountable to them as well, if I'm honest.
Okay, great.
My name is Darryl Morant. I work for Onstage Systems, a production company here in Dallas. I have 35 full-time employees underneath me. I just took on the role of general manager in March, and I'm just trying to get a better handle on keeping them and, as you said, myself accountable.
That's a large span of control, 35 people.
35 is why.
That'll keep you busy.
Well, good morning. My name is Myra, and my company is High Value Signs, full service commercial sign company. And as we grow, I've just kind of realized I don't know what I don't know. And when I was in corporate, it was easier, I guess, because there was already structure in place. And now it's me putting it in place. So I need to know what can I do to be fair and to be right, and what I do to hold people accountable. And I'm going to have to change the fact that they have to be held accountable. In my mind, it's like you should just be doing it because you love it, you want to do it, you know. But apparently, I do have to hold people accountable. And so, what does that mean, really?
I'm Dee Dee. I work with Whitlock Building Services. We do post-construction, final cleaning, commercial janitorial services. I manage 38 of our accounts as well as any of our post-construction projects that come up, so that can run from like 10 projects a month. So I come from a bar managing background where it was really loosely managed from our owners. So I think I picked up wrong tactics in managing people. So I'm here to really see how I can change that, since I am learning on managing a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah, my name is Justin. And so Chief Creative Officer is my role with the company called New Minds Enrichment. We do education enrichment, like summer camps and after school programming, and helping with professional development for teachers. So, and the reason I'm here is because my new role, same kind of idea. I'm now managing about 15 people. They're all a lot younger than me. And so it's exciting because they are very creative, and we need to have that kind of creativity to fuel things. But I've always said, like, accountability is what happens whenever trust begins to kind of erode. Like the whole idea, like, man, like we hope they're pumped up to do it themselves. So yeah, so I mean, the downside is that like 2 balls got dropped, and so I was like, man, well, how do I hold accountability? And then I love what you said, so I'm going to piggyback on that. Like, holding myself accountable too. Like, what does it mean for them to be able to look at me and make sure I'm delivering as well? So I would say to boil it all down, probably definition.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's no doubt it's a two-way street here, so.
My name is Luis Nieto, and a couple of years ago, my partners and I opened our own construction company. So we're pretty much taking seminars to understand where we stand in ourselves as well. Understanding, we manage between, it varies in construction. We could have 16 people working for us, or we could have 50, 60. So, you know, starting from the top, we need to make sure our project managers and our superintendents and all of them understand that we try and show them how to hold our employees accountable as well.
Super. Stan, you want to introduce
Yeah,
yourself?
sure. I'm the African American of the family. Born in Africa, South Africa, grew up in Central Africa, started work in mining and laboratories, and after college ended up in heavy trucking, which is a nightmare of people that don't want to do what they're supposed to do, and ended up in marketing, huge oil company, 400 or 500 people, pyramid, never handled more than about 6 or 7 as a span. But 400 or 500 people in operations and marketing and so on. And that certainly HR is the single biggest challenge that I think any manager ever faces. It's how you handle it, and the frustration, sheer frustration of not being able to control it yourself is palpable. So I've been in the US now for nearly 30 years, haven't learned to talk Texan yet, but I'm fixing to.
That was pretty good. That was pretty good, Stan.
I'm trying. Haven't got to you all yet.
It'll come. So I guess the question is, why me? Why Larry Nelson gets to present this particular workshop? I actually started out my career after graduate school. I started out as an HR manager. I worked for Ralston Purina Company. Probably heard of the dog and cat food, piece of it. It's actually quite large company. It's now owned by Nestle. But the plant that I worked in, we had about 500 employees, and I was the HR manager. We did continuous training of all of our supervisors and our leads. And so that got me into the amount of training and stuff that I did. But it forged really, I guess, my background for the future, because I only stayed in HR for about 5 years. I then moved into operations. Operations, heavy into the supply chain side of things, warehousing, distribution, purchasing, all those aspects. And of course, with all of those, you have large number of employees that work for you. All the background that I got being a trainer in HR allowed me to actually put to practice everything that I used to preach to everybody else, okay? So I know it does work, and I've tried it on both sides of the house, so today we'll try to give you some insight into this process. Now, we've got a brand new person here. We're going to make him introduce himself so that we know who he is. But we want today to be as interactive, okay? If you've got situations, questions, we got a small group here. It should work very well for us to just, ask the questions, okay? We can piggyback off each other, and sometimes you'll have better solutions than I have. So is it Alex?
Yeah, so first of all, sorry for interrupting and coming in late. I got lost. I went into the next building.
You're not the first one, though.
Awesome. My name is Alex. I own a multilingual solutions company called NetWire Global. We provide language services to the corporate market. Basically, we help companies get into other countries through translation services. So we translate from things that are product related. So for example, I like to use the example of a smartphone. So for Apple to get their product in Germany and France, they need to translate a whole bunch of things. They need to translate the software, the iOS. They need to translate the packaging, the website, the marketing collateral, and a whole lot of things so that they can do business in these other countries and put their products out there. That's what we help companies do.
Super. Good. Well, let's go ahead and get started here. How many of you have actually worked with SCORE before? Any of you? Okay, half the group.
My boss actually directed me this way.
Well,
The
great.
owner of the company. So she's,
I'll give you a brief introduction to SCORE. That's who Stan and I and Rick and Bill all represent. You may not realize there's two people inside that box right there. One's in Lubbock and one's in Flower Mound, Texas.
Okay.
Okay. But SCORE is a nonprofit organization. We've been around for 55 years now. And we're made up of almost 11,000 volunteers. So Stan, myself, the others, we're all volunteers. We've all been in business at one point in our lives and learned both good and bad things. And what we want to do is to share that with the communities that we live. So we happen to be part of the Dallas chapter here. The Dallas chapter has about 80 volunteers. Fort Worth has about another 60 volunteers. And our goal is pretty simple. We do two things. We either mentor people one-on-one, or we provide educational services. So you're at one of the educational services programs today. All the mentoring we do is totally free. We never charge anybody for any of the mentoring we do. Our workshops are programs that we try to put on as low cost as we can. But because we're a nonprofit, we still have to generate some revenue to support the paper that we use and the brochures that you get and all that good stuff. In an office, we actually have one full-time office that's up in Addison on Beltline and the North Dallas Tollway. So we do earn some money through our workshops. Now, those of you who came today, when you probably first saw this, it said, holding employees accountable, $50. Went through the registration, and nowhere did we ask you for any money. That was a mistake on my assistant's part, but you all benefit from that. So typically we do charge for this work.
How do we pay right now? I would like to pay anyways.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Well, when you leave, if you feel you got some value, slip me a few bucks, we'll take it.
Okay.
Excellent. But that's how we earn our money to keep the offices open. So it used to be through mentoring, almost all the mentoring was one-on-one, face-to-face. But through technology over 55 years, this meant we got started back in the 1960s. We didn't have the phone capabilities that we have today. We didn't have video conferencing, email definitely, texting, any of that type of stuff. So today, you have access to literally all 11,000 volunteers that we have. And so our job when you come in to see a mentor, if you were to talk to Stan or myself, if we can't help you ourselves personally, our goal is to find you a resource who can. And so each of us have a very distinctive background ourselves. If somebody needed to repair a cell phone, they might really need to find me to set up a plant to do that. That's what I used to do in my life, is set up electronic reverse logistics facilities. And so somebody around the country, and they would reach out, a mentor would reach out to try to find my skill set for you, and then hook us up so that I could help you. So literally, you have access to a lot of people. So anyway, that's who SCORE is. We've been around for a long time. Bill skip through some of these slides, but the main thing is that you understand the mentoring is totally free. As you go through your life as a manager, or an owner of a company, you need to understand that there's really 5 important people in your life. I'm scrolling through some of these because I've already covered it. But the 5 people in your life, you always need to be familiar with your banker, an insurance broker, an attorney, a mentor, a business mentor. And we as SCORE encourage you to utilize yourselves. It doesn't have to be just SCORE. find somebody who's been there, done that, and somebody that you can bounce off. It's kind of like, even in, many of you work for other companies, right? Within the companies, hopefully there's a mentor within that company that you can go to and seek some advice. You know, if you're having to deal with a lot of, you know, employee issues, it's nice to have somebody to talk to who's also done that. So I do encourage you to get, you know, find those people. So anyway.
What was the fifth one? Banker, insurance, attorney, business major.
Accountant. Yeah, I'm sorry.
CPA.
CPA or an accountant, something like that. So you should all, in your packets, have a copy of the slides today. So all this information is available to you. But here in Dallas, we have our SCORE office. Like I said, it's at Beltline and the North Dallas Tollway. We have a local website. Stan here happens to be our web master. He keeps that thing up to date. You can go in there, and that's where you can find out where all of our workshops are. So most of our workshops are such that they're low cost or sometimes no cost if somebody sponsors the workshop. And so we're getting better and better at finding people, companies that want to support SCORE. And so they say, hey, you do the workshop, we'll pay you and don't charge your attendance. So a lot of banks like to do that. We appreciate that. Some businesses, investment firms have done it in the past. So sometimes you'll see a $10 fee. And the $10 fee usually means somebody else is sponsoring it. The $10 assures that you have a little skin in the game, and the chances are you'll show up. You know what the attendance rate is if we don't charge?
20%?
The attendance, you're close, it's 30%. 70% of the people don't come if we don't charge. And so we've kind of gotten in the mode of not charging that. So I don't know what made all of you come today, because you got it free, you know. But anyway, we do make a little money off of this to support others. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, it would help if I would put that right presentation up. Yeah, I apologize for that, man. I had 2 presentations up here, and I brought up the wrong one.
If you go faster, you get 2 for 1.
That's right. Well, I'm doing the other one right after lunch.
Yeah.
So I found good. They kind of start out the same.
If you go to that dallas.score.org, you'll see workshops. And it's very easy to then just scroll down and see what interests you. Also where they are, because we work all the way from Flower Mound to DeSoto and all points in between. So it might not be convenient. What you want may be not in McKinney or something, but just watch it. You'll pick up all sorts of information.
Okay, now I'm on the right presentation.
You know, if you want to go to a particular slide, just punch in the number and then hit enter.
Oh, well, that would help if I knew which slide. But anyway, holding employees accountable. I always like to start this by talking about a little story. And so I'm going to read this particular story, but it's about 4 employees. I use this many, many times in the company. There's always everybody out there. There's somebody, there's anybody, and there's nobody. Okay, so we're going to hear a story about these. So there was an important job to be done, and everybody was asked to do it. Everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. You've all heard that one before, right? We see that day in, day out. That is the most common problem that you'll face in your businesses, right? Nobody takes the accountability for different tasks and stuff to be done. So in this particular case, nobody, you know, was the person who was supposed to do it, right?
Are there tasks that you should not be asking your employees to do?
Illegal ones? What are you talking about?
Well, for example, in my business, we generate we're vinyl shop, so we generate some paper and it piles up in the trash can. And over the weekend, I was like, I really want some accountability for people to help share the workload. Taking that, now I can hire a janitorial company, but that's extra money, right? It's got to come from somewhere.
Sure.
So I just said, I'd like to, and I don't think it's, you know, I kind of planted the seed like, hey, I think we're going to have these set of tasks that are kind of straighten up, clean up, organize before you leave on Friday so that it's clean on Monday. And I have in the back of my mind, should I be asking my employees to do that?
Yes.
Yes.
I ask my employees to clean the toilets. Rotate.
Oh,
There's opening duties, closing duties, daily cleaning duties specific each day. Things.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
everyone sweeps the floor, everyone scrubs the floor, everyone mops the floor, everyone scrubs the toilets, everyone fills the soap. Everybody, within a month, everyone has done every single one of those jobs.
You know, she said everyone. That starts with you. And I'm a big advocate of, I'm not going to ask anybody to do something that I wouldn't do.
I mean, I've been doing it for 5 years.
That's
Well,
my
I'm
point.
kind
So
of
you've done it. So it's like
You
half
set the
time.
example, and then it is their responsibility now to understand that this is the standard, and you're going to hold everybody accountable. It's as simple as that.
Thank you.
Well, it's not always as simple as that. I mean, you would hope that it is, but as you know, you say certain things, but it never gets done. So that's what we're going to talk about today is what can you do as managers to actually hold those people accountable for the tasks that you do assign them, okay? So why don't companies hold people accountable? You've all been with companies. What's the common failures that we see?
Follow through.
Follow through, sure. You got to follow through with what you tell them to
More
do.
work for me.
Confrontation, right?
It is more work for you as a manager.
Judy said confrontation.
Confrontation, that is a big one.
Mhm.
People dislike the fact that they have to come tell you that you just didn't clean the toilets, right? What, it's my turn? Right? But somebody has to approach them. I see the same thing, you know, even as I happen to also be the president of our SCORE chapter. Even though we're volunteers, there's certain things that have to be done. And so I have to tell people, I get pushback all the time. But unless I tell them, you know, they just keep not doing what they should be doing, right? So yeah.
Just real fast, I'll use the toilet example too, because it's a good way to, as a metaphor, talk about expectations. So like if you said, hey, have the toilets clean, and you get like a half-done scrub job, and they say, I did it. So it's cool. You said like you set the standard and you define that piece. So for me, it's how do you create the clear expectations that your expectations are met?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's an important part, and we're going to cover that, but it's setting those expectations. So, and you brought up most of these things. It's hard to communicate negative feedback to people, right? It's pretty easy to go tell somebody you did a great job, but to go tell somebody that you did, you know, a really terrible job cleaning the toilets, that's a little bit harder to come tell somebody, okay? Or they didn't get to work on time. Sometimes, you know, would you believe attendance and absenteeism and tardiness are probably the biggest reason people are terminated today? Okay. And there are things that you control as an individual yourself, right? Just getting to work on time or just showing up to work. But anyway, goals, and you kind of all touched on it here, the goals aren't clearly defined. No formal method to communicate the feedback. See, a lot of times, you know, and we'll get into each of these, but you should have, in a production environment, you have team meetings first thing in the morning. A lot of production teams, before they start, will have a 5-minute session say, here's today's tasks. Here's the things we have to accomplish. We got these 15 jobs we've got to run. You cover maybe the cleaning of the trash, stuff like that. Whose job is it today or whatever. But you have a method or some formal way to communicate it. And then a lot of companies are not really proactive, they react. Okay? You think about that a little bit. If I set a plan in place, okay, that's being proactive. I'm saying this is what's going to take place, when it's going to take place, how it's going to take place. Okay? But instead, we as managers wait until there's a problem, and then we react to the problem, right? And so you know that the trash can is going to be filled up at the end of the day, right? So at the beginning of the day, you tell somebody that it's your job today to clean the trash can, okay? Instead of getting all upset at the end of the day. So that's what we talk about. Don't react, put a plan in place, and then manage to your plan. And then, in general, managers do not like to discipline others. So those are probably the most common reasons that companies don't hold people accountable. And it's tough. I bet I've probably educated several hundred, maybe close to 1,000 managers through my lifetime. And this piece of your personality is the hardest one for me to really affect. Because we got to get you to do something that you don't necessarily like to do. Handle that confrontation that you talked about. A lot of us just inbred, we don't want to tell somebody something negative. And so we're going to talk about how you can deal with that and realize there's facts involved here. And if you stick to the facts and let people understand, you know, where you're going, what you're doing, all that, it becomes much easier. I'm not going to say it's the easiest thing in life to do. You know, how many have had to terminate somebody? Yeah. Do you enjoy doing that? No.
I like to say I don't terminate them. They terminate themselves.
That's correct. That is the right way to be looking at it, because if everybody would be doing the job the way they're supposed to, you know, you wouldn't have to terminate folks. So anyway. So what do you do to gain, or what do you gain by holding people accountable? Let's talk about some of your benefits. Certainly, you want to drive the focus on, you know, on the company and the employees themselves. You want to get that specific thing set out so that you know, is this a company or is this an employee-oriented? It ensures your people work towards a common plan. Now, how many of you within your businesses have a business plan that you manage by? You've got one. See, a business plan is typically lacking. And if you come to school, right, Stan, we always ask to see your business plan, right? Because if you go in, and it doesn't matter, your business plan can be for one segment, one department, or it can be for the entire organization. But it's important to have a plan, because the plan lays out, you know, what your expectations are, what your goals are, and so forth. And so if you don't have a plan, you're probably missing that opportunity to keep your employees informed on what they're going to have to do to accomplish what your goals are. So it develops the employees' capabilities, because hopefully as you set your plans in place and you're trying to hold people accountable, you're trying to develop their skills, you know, for the company. Because you may take an entry-level person that you just hired off the street, they're totally new into the production environment, but at some point in time, you have this expectation that within a year they can take on this type of job. The next year they can take this and this, and eventually someday they can run the company, okay? You know, you want to create a level of opportunity for your employees. And if they see that and they see that they're progressing, that's both good for you as their manager, but even better for the company, because you develop people from within. But it empowers employees too. When you hold them accountable, you know, if you say, hey, your responsibility is this, they go, hey, this is my job. You know, I have the authority to go out and make sure this happens. And so it creates pride in your work. You know, hopefully the positive always happens, but they get the recognition that goes along with that. Identifies issues quickly. This is one of the more important things, is that when you set out and are holding people accountable for things, that means you have goals and objectives, that very quickly you'll see when people are not meeting those. You don't have to wait for 6 months, 9 months, or whatever. You'll see that they're not in sync with what the plan is. And then it provides some factual data to give rewards to. Don't forget the positive side. You know, not only when you hold people accountable, you look at both positive and negative, because you do want to promote people as much as you may have to either displace or replace people. And it assists in meeting customer needs, getting away from this comment, that's not my job type thing. I hate that when people say, that's not my job. I see that more often when I go to the city offices, like renewing my tags on my cars. No, that's not my job. Okay, but it happens. So any others that you might think about? Any other values, benefits to yourself? Not yet. Well, you will.
Your own success more than anything else.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you depend on those people. Your success is their success, and vice versa.
So here's one of the acronyms we use when we talk about accountability. It's called the SIMPLE process. You're going to set some expectations for the employees. We're going to go through each of these, but you're going to invite commitment, okay? Because it's one thing for you as a manager to set these expectations, but you got to get a commitment from the employee that, yes, I will do this. Okay? If you don't have their commitment, you're going to have a problem right away. So as you set these expectations, you want this buy-off. You're going to measure their progress in some way. So measuring it, whatever these goals or objectives are, they have to be measurable. So, you know, cleaning the trash can is easy enough, or the toilet's easy enough. Answering the telephone on time, you know, within 3. I had a company that I consulted with. One of their goals for their employees, all of them, was to answer the telephone within 3 rings. Because one of the things they pitched was that personal contact. You didn't get an answering machine. That's a little bit harder to measure, okay? But it can still, with technology, you can set that up. So you can see how many calls ring 3 times and then go off to voicemail or something like that, right? So there's still ways to do it, but you can set up goals, but make sure they're measurable. And then providing feedback to the person, extremely important. One of the things I used to do as a manager was I carried a little, of course today we have telephones, with notes, notes, you know, that you can write notes, you know, as you progress, you know, walk through the floors. I used to manage by roaming around the facility, and as I would see things or hear things, I'd make notes for myself of good and bad, of things that we're achieving, things that are not achieving, so that I had a chance to provide that feedback to the individual. So you got to figure out a way, how do I collect this? And then link, okay, link all of this, the accountability, to consequences. And I love this because my sons all talk about consequences with their children. I knew the consequences with my parents, okay? And it wasn't a positive one if I didn't do what I was supposed to do. But there should be a consequence, right? You know, so for every company, and each company can have different types of consequences. Sometimes that consequence might be just a verbal reprimand. You pull the employee aside, tell them that, hey, you didn't achieve this on this date, and because of that, you're being given a verbal warning. Have you heard of companies have verbal warnings? That's pretty common. But that verbal warning usually has a note in your file that you were given a verbal warning on this date. Okay? And that's there for a reason, okay? And it's progression. And then the last piece is you need to evaluate the effectiveness of the goals and objectives that you're given to people. Because like that task of cleaning the trash seems very minuscule in the course of all the activities over the course of the day. But if that task ended up absorbing that whole person's time, you lose them on the production side of things. Going, well, wait a second, great, they're doing what I asked them to do, but the big scheme of things isn't being accomplished. So evaluate what you're asking people to do to make sure it's in accordance with the direction you want your company to go.
Could you circle back to, could we list out some more consequences? Like you said, verbal reprimand. I've written.
Sure, I'm going to get into those. I'm
Okay.
going to get into those. We're going to talk about all of this in more detail. So what must you have, to hold people accountable? It's really not as complicated as you might think. I've always thought it was, fairly simple to do, and you've probably all seen this, and it's out there for a reason. But it starts with a good job description. How many of you have job descriptions with your company? Okay, step one done. Okay.
Today.
Now, how many have good job descriptions with your company?
No.
Okay, that's the real difference here. Okay, so everybody can have job descriptions, but the question becomes how good are they? Okay? And that's hopefully we're going to go through some job descriptions here in a second. But you've got to identify, is it enough to get the person to understand what my goals and objectives really are?
But isn't having a job description, there's also a downside to it, right? Because it seems that we kind of take a picture of what has to be done, and so anything that's outside of that kind of is not my job, right? And as we're small companies, we usually have several hats to wear, right? And so our employees, and the world is dynamic, so sometimes things change, and the job description that we put in place once we were hiring them, it's not exactly the same maybe 3 months down the road.
That's where it takes
That's where
extra
you
work.
update the job description.
Yeah, see, this is where it becomes more work for you as a manager, is you have to try to keep your job descriptions updated. And you'll see in almost any job description, at the bottom it lists all these tasks, and then it says, and other responsibilities as assigned, right? That covers everything else I might tell you to do. Okay, but those other things are probably not the most important to that job, okay? The ones that are getting measured constantly should be up in the main part of the job description, but the other duties as assigned, like going out to clean the trash or the toilet, or to, call a meeting of the employees, I don't do that every day, right? But you ask to, somebody to do that. And so you can do that. So yes, as a manager, you got to realize there's work to it. But if you keep the job descriptions updated periodically, okay? And the way I like to do that is to get the employees to help you update those job descriptions. Every 3 or 6 months, simply go out and say to your employees and say, write down all the tasks and duties that you do today, and about what % of your time do you spend on it, okay? And so, give them a couple days or even a week to do that task, but it allows them to think through, here's all the things that I do. Some of these I do once a month. Some of these tasks I do every day. Some of it it's, 6 hours of the day I'm doing this one task, okay? But then I've got all these other things that a little bit of my time is spent. But that helps you to define the job description form. And so you can relate that to the job description you have on file. If it needs to be changed, change it, okay? So, second thing, define goals and objectives. Every job should have some defined goals and objectives. And I can't think I've ever come across any job that I couldn't come up with some goals or objectives. Certainly the higher you get up, there's a lot of financial goals and stuff like that. But even at the lowest level, there are still goals and objectives that you could assign person. Can you think of any job that you have that you couldn't come up with a goal for the person or an objective for? It's pretty tough to do.
my benchmarks is, in addition to job descriptions, I have standard operating procedures for each department and each job, so that covers that area between one person's job description from the others, as opposed to the whole.
Typically, what companies will do with the job description is they define the task, and then they relate that to the policies or the procedures that have been written defining how you do it. Okay, so that's the procedures manuals are typically the how-to. Okay, and you can relate that, in the job description. See policy XYZ, and it'll tell you how to actually record this. Okay. How many of you have a corrective action process defined in your company? Okay. That is something that if you're going to do this, corrective action, I mean, the whole idea of holding people accountable is that you're going to have to identify what the problems are and have, remember, consequences. So you've got to have some type of corrective action process. Now, maybe the terminology isn't great. I can't think of another one, Stan, but corrective action is you tending to try to change their action to a more positive venue for your company. So
is that generally communicated to the employees? Like, once I develop it, do I tell them this is the process?
Yeah. Do any of you have employee handbooks? In the employee handbook or in the company's policies and procedures manual, there should be a section on corrective action, and it should define your process. So go ahead.
I have, like, just referencing our company, because we work a lot with as subcontractors. So how, even though we kind of have a plan in place for subcontractors, it's harder to really control them because of how they operate. So what would you say would be the best way to go about that in terms of holding subcontractors accountable?
Well, typically when you have subs, there is usually either a lead or a point of contact, a project manager from the contractor, that becomes your focal point for issues. And so if it's an employee, when you negotiate your contract, you can negotiate with them that the subs employees must adhere to the company's policies and procedures. Okay, you should state that in your contract with them. And so that they're governed by the same rules that your own employees are governed by. Now, the direction you take when an employee has or a sub has a violation of that would be you would go to the point person in the contractor, so either their project manager or their lead on site, and say, okay, we have a violation of a safety code here. You see this a lot in construction, and so you take that to the project manager, say this needs to be corrected. And so at a point in time, if it continues, then you anticipate your contractor should be correcting the issue. If the contractor doesn't correct the issue, what should your company do? Switch contractors. That's right. And I mean, that's the consequence the contractor has to deal with. That if they can't abide by the rules and regulations that you put on your own employees, then you'll use a different contractor. So it's in their best interest too, but you need to communicate that too, So if you have certain, like clothing, you said you're in construction, right? Mm-hmm. I spent a long time in construction as well. There's certain OSHA requirements, certain safety things that you have to do depending on what site you're on. So you might have to wear a hard hat, simple as a hard hat, right? But if you catch an employee not wearing a hard hat,
these days you just send them off the job site.
Yeah.
They don't even put up with it.
Right. And so that consequence, because hard hats and the number of people who have been hit in the head and killed, is a very serious thing on a job site. It sounds simple enough to put your hat on, but many people don't do it. But to the companies, it's so serious, they literally send you off the site. So you have to identify the consequence to realize that. When I worked for Ross and Purina in a manufacturing plant, you could not wear jewelry in the plant. Your rings, certainly no necklaces, but if you had a ring on, or your shirt sleeves, if you had long sleeve shirts, they had to be buttoned because it's so easy to get them caught into a conveyor and literally rip your finger off if it's a ring, or put a nice mark around your neck, or possibly strangle you if it was a necklace. So simple things like that had serious consequences to them if you were caught in violation. So anyway, timely reviews of your performance. Again, this needs to be, communicated to people. It is not uncommon to have, like a probationary employee, when you bring them on, that you're going to do a 30-day review or a weekly review if they have a lead. You set up a time period, though. I'm going to review you at the end of your first day, then at the end of your first week, the end of your first month. Give them some insight as to how they're progressing. Your company may say, hey, I'm going to review you at the end of the first month. But you, as a company, define what works best for you. There's all different types, of ways to review performance. You have to pick the one that's best for your company, okay? Now, Daryl there, he's got 34 employees. You hire a lot of people new in off the street with no skill, or are they all skilled labor?
No, my company and the full and part-time employees is 35. I also manage about 311 on-call based on, yeah. So
you'll find that
in those areas, that those are varied in skill, but the skill sets for the employees, because we're in a technical background, are very well defined and very specific, and pay is based on their level of performance.
So you'll find that the less skilled the job is or requires, the more quickly you need to give some timely reviews on the front end of the process. Meaning that, I brought in somebody right straight off the street, they had no experience doing this, and I'm giving them a simple task of packaging boxes with a certain type of material. And so in that particular case, you're probably going to have a supervisor, that might check up with them 2 or 3 times a day to give them feedback. That's part of the performance feedback, and then at the end of their first month or 2 months, you give them a true performance review that covers, how well they've done, on the job, timeliness, accuracy of their packing, if that's what they were doing, just their attitude, work ability with other people, things like that. You give them insight on. So, but myself as a consultant, I may come in, do an analysis, and you might not hear from me for a month or 2 while I'm doing all the work on the side. So you might not come talk to me for quite a while. So the more skilled, probably the longer the review process is. You may talk to me every 6 months. Managerial commitment. This is your guys' commitment. You have to have a level of commitment. Do you really want to hold people accountable? And if that is yes, that means you probably will have to dismiss people at some point in time. That's the hardest piece. I told you I have dealing with managers. They hate that confrontation, but you have to be committed to doing it fairly for everybody and consistently for everybody. And, we all have those employees that, geez, you just love them to leave. Geez, just, don't show up for work so my problem goes away. They test you on everything, but you have to treat them the exact same way as you would, your favorite employee out there. So, but your commitment is extremely important to this. Job descriptions. I'm going to go through each of these. So let's talk about job descriptions. It should include what's to be done, when to be done, and how it's to be done. So check your job descriptions. I think you all said you had job descriptions. The question was how good they are. So what you want to do, see if there's a what, a when, and a how in all of those, okay? And then how you can go about assessing whether your job description is adequate or as good as maybe some of the industry standards. You can go out, to the employees themselves and have them write down their tasks to make sure that what you think you're asking them to do is what they're actually doing, okay? So convince yourself that, yep, I asked them to do these things through the job description, and when I look at the list of things they're doing, they match. If they don't match, you need to change one of the two things, either what you're asking them to do or change the job description and show what they are doing, okay? Well, I talked already about spending how much time. The time element certainly gives you an idea of their total time, but it's not necessarily covers the importance of the task. You may have one task, and that's running a report at the end of the month, and it takes 2 or 3 hours to do it. But that report is so important to the company, it's going to determine the company's buying pattern for the next year or for the next month. That has a big dollar impact. So don't dismiss any given task just because they don't spend a lot of time on it, okay? But do understand how much time they're spending in the different areas. So where can you find job descriptions in the industry? One of the best areas right now is the internet. You can go out to the internet, and if you have a type of job that you have in your own company, chances are you can go out on the internet and search for that job.
What happens if you can't?
Pardon?
What if you can't? What if?
Well, then you're going to have to create one yourself, and that's literally by sitting down and understanding and defining the tasks that you give the individuals. But to be common, because you can go to the internet, you want to make sure that you're equitable with your pay. And so you should be comparing your jobs to what other jobs in the industry are offering pay-wise. That way, you may think your job's worth, $15 an hour, but if you go to the internet and you see they're only paying people $10 an hour to do the same thing, well, you're doing a really nice job for your employees, but not necessarily a positive thing for the company, because others can hire people for 10, or it works the other way too. You're paying 10 and the industry says you should be paying 15, and you realize that your employees stick with you for maybe 6 months, a year, and then they leave you. Well, that's when they realize they can do the same work with somebody else and get paid, 50% more. So go to the internet to at least check. It helps you with the wording a lot. I'm not a great wordsmithing person, and so I like to pull the job descriptions. It's a better way of saying, what we're doing. But that's one place. There's HR consulting companies that if your firm can afford one, they will come in either on site and do basically what you can do as a manager, identify all the tasks and goals and objectives for each employee, write them down and create a job description for you. There are what they call employee relation cooperatives. Companies like when I worked for Walsh and Purina, we were in pet food and cereal manufacturing. Walsh and Purina makes cereals, Rice Chex, Corn Chex, stuff like that. Well, there was a cooperative of other bakery type of companies. Keebler was one of them. There's multiple ones up in the Denver area, but we created a cooperative that had all the HR capabilities. So employee relations oriented, they would help us write a handbook. They would help us with our job descriptions so that I could relate my job description to a batcher, which is an unusual term. A batcher is the guy that mixes the recipe, of course, tons at a time, but they're taking so many tons of wheat, so many tons of corn, dumping it into a big vat, right? And they batch that. Well, every bakery does that. So how do you relate our job descriptions to one another? So the cooperatives can share those. Okay. Other business acquaintances, people that you know that are in business that have job responsibilities like that, go out and ask what they have. They'll share. You know, would you share your job? You don't have to tell them who's doing these jobs, but would you share your job description with another company? If you have a good working relationship with them, I hope you would. And then job postings, the monsters, career builders, stuff like that, you can go out there. And for the most part, they're posting a job description, okay, for, you know, a person to interview for. So all of those allow you to create the job description. Plenty of sources. Now this is a little hard. It's easier probably in your handout to read. But here's a job description. I want you to read through it and tell me whether you think it's good or bad. Just take a look. I'll give you a couple minutes to look.
I wouldn't worry too much.
Oh.
I'm not sure what you're looking
Share the screen.
for. Rather leave it. Perfect. Participants list. You can actually,
So you're seeing this.
yeah.
Okay.
And I can
Good.
just raise my hand.
Okay. Yes. Now, what do you think?
You went ahead.
Good or bad? Nobody wants to be.
No, you went ahead.
It's
Oh.
average.
I went ahead.
That's the improvement.
One day.
We know it's bad because there's a
Trying to go.
version.
Right? Maybe some of the information's a little vague.
Vague in what way?
Too general, not clearly stating what exactly, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it kind of tells you what they want, but it doesn't really tell you the,
Like
you
you
know,
can say the product.
the
is
goals, the tasks, all these things as far as how they're going to be measurable. Remember that you want your things measurable. So at the end of the day, I can come back and tell you that you did well or you didn't do well. So. Okay. So here's the improved version. Now I want to interface with customers either by telephone, electronically, or face-to-face daily. Okay? You're telling them that this is a daily type of task that you're going to be involved with. Respond same day to customer inquiries. So if a customer calls with a question, right? You have same day, you have to do that. So again, I can measure that. When did the customer call? When did you respond? There. Handle and resolve customer complaints within 24 hours. Skip down if you perform 10 customer verifications daily. You know, all the way down, it's given them process orders and requests with 99% accuracy. And we're assuming the company can measure that. But put things in there so that they understand that, hey, 99%, man, that's that's pretty accurate. But when you're doing, 100 of these a day, that allows you to make one mistake, But it's their normal job. I mean, we all do these repetitive things. So 99% will catch their attention, but when they realize that you're literally doing hundreds of these things, it's not so bad. But that would be a way to put in a little bit more of the how, the what, and the measurable aspect of it. So you've got to figure out, can it be measured? And I think this was a little more specific with the it said high school or general education, knowledge of customer service principles. And then knowledge very specifically of Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and a CRM basics, customer relationship management system. Didn't say which one, but they want you to have some experience with one. Ability to type again, and then, you know, knowledge of XYZ donut machine. If you, well, in construction, if there's particular type of equipment that you need the person to have skill set with, right? You're gonna put that in there, that they have to have this knowledge of. And so, or you could put in the ability to learn it in a short period of time or something, but some of those are requirements. You know, the office copier is a very difficult machine to operate. You can scan and fax and, you know, copy and, you know, do everything, but don't ask me to do it because it's way past my capabilities. So anyways, get specific. That's the whole point. Get specific with what you're asking people to do. So let's define some goals and objectives. So we got job descriptions. You're all going to go back, take a look at what you have out there already, and figure out if they're good or not, okay? And then revamp them. But I really encourage you to get the employees involved with writing them. That's getting their buy-in, their commitment to it. And that's a nice task to do once in a while. You can't always ask the employees to do it all the time, but every once in a while, particularly now, if you're going to do it, get them involved and say, hey, let's get this well-defined for you. Okay? So getting goals and objectives in here. Has anybody heard of this acronym, SMART? Okay, you probably heard it a lot. But we want every goal or objective to be a SMART one, right? Very specific, something that you can measure, agreed upon, that's that commitment again. It needs to be realistic. That's probably the most subjective part of this, is the realistic. Because what I think as the manager is realistic, and what you think as the employee is realistic, may not match. So, anybody give me an example of something that is like that in your own jobs, where you as a manager have higher expectations than the employee?
So I have an employee who is good, he shows up on time, he does good work, but he's texting his wife constantly all day long. I have written him up for it. I have made him leave it in the car. I have done everything, and I'm just at my wit's end. And I'm just like, should I just let it go because he's a good employee?
No.
Or how do I deal with this? Like,
your
and I can't measure it. I don't get on his phone and go, well, how many texts did you send today? I can just monitor. I can see in his work, he's not paying attention to details. I'm having to kick more work back to him.
That's not a good employee.
But he's dependable, and he's got a good attitude. And
here's an example. I had a guy, great technician, showed up to work on time, was usually early. Clients loved him, but he drank on the job. Is he a good employee or not?
Well, I don't know.
Now,
Well,
and the reason I say that is because
you should know, depending on what the company policies and procedures are.
The standard, the company standard is there's no drinking on the job, period. And this is what I meant by, I don't fire people, they fire themselves. If the standard is you can't drink on the job, and he's doing everything else, but he's drinking on the job, there's two things you can do. One, you can allow it to escape and affect everybody else around him, or you can give him some help or terminate him, because he's clearly breaking the rules that you've defined for the company. Do you want to lose somebody like that? That's a hard decision, but they all are.
Well, we're going to get into that consequence thing, but that's the whole idea of setting these, expectations with your employees, that in this case, drinking on the job is one thing. That's pretty common with most companies, and drinking on the job should be defined as a consequence. Now, which consequence is up to the company, but most companies, it's immediate termination. You know, up at Coors in Colorado, it's a warning. No lie, they serve beer, you know, in the cafeteria. And they offer rehab programs too. But anyway, most companies, it is truly an offense that immediate termination. But if your company sets a policy that says my discipline process is first occurrence, we give you a warning. Second occurrence, I give you a written warning or reprimand or a couple days later off without pay. You know, third occurrence, now we fire. The same with yours. Now yours is a little bit different because here, you know, with the cell phone, you mentioned that here's an employee that is texting, but the real issue is it's affecting their work. And so you should have, well, first of all, I would ask, would you ask all employees to leave their cell phones in the car? If that's the case, that's proper. I work for a company which cell phone repair. We ask all people to keep their own cell phones in their own car. It's hard to tell who's who in a plant, you know. But if you ask all employees to leave them in the car, you could ask that employee to leave them in the car. But if you don't treat all employees the same way, then you're vulnerable for discrimination. Okay, why are you picking on me? You know, they have a cell phone, right? What you can deal with, though, is the issue of their performance. And so if you have their performance, and if accuracy is a part of that, and I hope it is, accuracy of an employee's work, that would be the issue that I would address, or the amount of work that they're supposed to get done in a given day. Right? Those would be the issues I would address. Because I'm going to guess that other employees text people occasionally. Right?
Yeah, and I set a company policy, and it was like 2-2-2-2, right? 2 texts, 2 minute phone call twice a day. You know, so I was kind of like, this is what it is, and it's communicated and communicated. Okay.
I might question that a little bit. That's hard to measure everybody if they're doing the 2-2.
It is hard.
Yeah.
That's what I'm fighting.
So yeah, I would, you know. Actually, the texting thing has really come on and become much more viable since I've left the workforce. But cell phones certainly were in place, you know, at the time I was in it. But you have to come up with something that's reasonable. That probably isn't a reasonable thing to measure. I would concentrate on people's work, or just tell them that you only text and stuff during your breaks. You know, morning, afternoon break, and lunch hours. You're not to use your personal phones. That's a better policy. You're not to use your regular your cell phones during the work hours unless you're out at break in a break room or something like that. But you should never use it at your desk.
I have a question. Is this employee, is their wife pregnant or suffering any illnesses, or is it just their relationship?
Just kind of it's a relationship. And it started from the very beginning. We're in the meeting. I first hired him. He's sitting there with his phone in the meeting. And I stopped and I said, would you like us to take a break? So it was like, to him, that was just the way you did it. Because you did that in school. You did that.
He's young, right?
Yeah. And he was like this, and I'm like, no, this is not appropriate behavior on the workplace.
Well, and that's where you as the management side have to set your expectations with the employee. And so are you the total manager? You don't have to have anybody else's buyout?
Well, I
There
here shortly.
Well, within your employee handbook or manual, I would set up a policy, you know, that clearly defines what the cell phone usage policy is. And the 222, to be honest, I think is not a good one. I would recommend maybe something else. And this is the wonderful part these days. You can go out on the internet. I bet I could go out and say, what's a good policy regarding cell phone usage in the workplace? And I bet you could find 50 easy examples of how people have written this policy.
This is actually, we use one based on that. It's fun. We call it no feeding.
No feeding?
Yeah, no feeding, which is you don't have a meeting with your phone.
Oh.
Because again, we have all young employees too, like ranging from 18 to 25. So when we said that, they got it. It was like when they have a meeting, there's no phone, so we don't. We compared it to having like dinner.
Yeah.
You see families that have dinner and they all share their phone. So we said there's no feeding, right?
Yeah.
Eating with the phone. There's no meeting with the phone. No work.
Yeah, and so, yeah, you can come up with those, you know, and you have the right to do that, you know.
And they made up working, they don't use, but it was like working with your phone. There's no, because it is when they're on the site, like they're working with kids, and so they say, no, I'm not gonna work with my phone. They came up with that. So they took ownership for it and started creating like their own expectations. So.
You know, we're talking about holding employees accountable, but it really goes back to the basics. Creating good policies and procedures within your company, creating good job descriptions, the goals and objectives that we're talking about here. It takes work from you guys to get these defined. Now, some of you have total control over, it's easy enough to get these policies pushed through. Some of you are going to have to work through management to get these policies you know, put in place. But once the policies are created, they have to be communicated. So, but back to this, the smart one. The last thing you want to make sure that on every goal or objective, there's a time frame, you know, so that this is supposed to be done every week, every month, or your goal is to get so many units produced at the end of the day, have it defined by the end of the day, end of the week, end of the month. So every job I've been in where I've had people in the repair facilities, repairing notebooks. We used to repair notebooks all the time. And they had a goal that we would set up that it was right around 7 notebooks had to be repaired per day. Now, because each notebook is a little unique and the problems you get into, a day wasn't a good measurement. It should average 7 times 5 or 35 per week. Okay. Because you always get that darn notebook that it's that lemon, you cannot find out what's going on, right? And so that one takes you 3 hours to fix. And so you're better off to set a reasonable, and that's where it comes to realistic, you know. So 7 a day would be pretty tough. 35 in a week though, because some notebooks come in and the person realizes, hey, all I got to do is, you know, clean the hard drive, reload the software. It was a software issue, not a hardware issue. And they're up and running in 15 minutes. So, and they know that. And so the employees, you know, bought off on the 35 a week, but not the 7 per day. But that's what I was looking at, you know, to realize 7 repairs meant so much revenue to me. Okay. But anyway, moving on. On these goals and objectives, make sure you tie the rewards to the KPIs, and those are key performance indices or index. Do any of your company have dashboards out there that you publish to employees? Some you probably get as management.
Yeah, we do internal.
Oh, yeah. But you too can have certain types of dashboards that you drive down within your organization. Or even if you don't create a dashboard for somebody, it's really just a publication of the KPIs out there. You still want to be able to communicate that to the employees. So either once a week or once a month, you send out the results for that employee and they can see how they're doing. Just like the repair techs that repair these notebooks. We put out a production sheet every day that showed how many, you know, notebooks got repaired by each tech every day. And so they could see it. It was very easy for them to know how they're doing against that particular objective. When you set goals and objectives, you probably shouldn't pick more than 2 or 3 to manage a single employee by. That's all that's really important. You'll have a lot of tasks for them to do, but the true goals and objectives for that person probably boils down to 2 or 3 things that they need to do consistently, and they need to do it well. Figure out what those are. They can have a lot of tasks, but the goals and objectives, keep them to a minimum. A lot of people, the key performance indices are created by you as managers to affect performance change. Like if sales are not going well right now. And I believe it's because we're not getting enough leads. You know, our marketing group needs to generate more leads so the salespeople can close them. I might go out and create a new KPI for the marketing people that they have to contact 15 new clients every day to get us introduced to the client, right? So that if we increase that, we'll have qualified more, which can be turned over to sales. So I can go in and change that KPI and tell the people, I want you to do 15, you know, contacts with new customers every day. That's a KPI I just created, because the impact will be eventually on sales. After we get them doing that, and I realize, oh, it wasn't the KPI of contacting, it's who they contact. They need to qualify who they're calling, not as much call a number. And so you define the KPI a little bit better and tell them what type. So now I might say, hey, you need to contact 10 clearinghouses for used equipment or something, but be very specifically. The idea is KPIs can be changed. You modify them to drive the behavior of your employees. When you give a performance, does everybody give performance reviews?
Well,
Yeah. Somebody else. Anyway, when you give a performance review, all these goals and objectives you talk about need to be covered. Okay, don't leave them out. So they should be written down somewhere, and you should cover them so they understand. These are your formal performance reviews when you do it. The fun piece, the corrective action side. That's what everybody wants to figure out. You know, what do we do here? It's a two-sided sword there. Hopefully, the corrective process will define the things that the employees will do to improve behavior. So if you go in and you have a session, a meeting with an employee, the employee should come out of this meeting knowing exactly what they need to do to improve their behavior. Okay? The management will also know what we have to do to help that employee improve their behavior. See, it's not one-sided here. You're responsible for that employee, and that's what I heard you guys say. You like that piece of holding you accountable too? And this is one of those pieces that you're going to let the employee know what they have to do. But you too are going to realize you have a task in there. And that may be giving them more feedback more readily. Okay? You know, maybe the employee comes in and says, you know, I wish you wouldn't have waited 3 weeks to tell me. You know, give him some feedback every other day, you know, every day. I'll take it. I'm a man, I can take it, good or bad. Okay? So that's your task. So just go into the situations knowing that. The process should be published and communicated. Like I said, the internet is a wonderful source. You can go out and find corrective action policies written. You'll want to modify it to your own, company. Stan, did you have one in your engraving company? The policy, was it in the employee handbook or separate policy?
Again, more just trying to stay on the correct legal side. We got one of the payroll companies to produce one of these 30-page monsters that nobody ever reads. And having done that, we tried to pull a few KPIs out of it. But my experience is that 90% of it doesn't work. We know that. mean, in the OSHA side of it, we have to teach somebody how to climb a ladder. It's that stupid. Truck drivers hauling gasoline, I had to instruct them that gasoline burned because that was a requirement under OSHA. But for the rest of it, once you have the handbook, the damn thing is useless unless you keep it up to date. Which means not the whole handbook, which is the 40-page monster, but the specific KPIs for that person. If you don't keep that up to date and you don't have buy-in from them, you might as well just let it gather dust on the shelf and then kick their ass when it doesn't work.
I got a question on that. I mean, it's talking about OSHA regulations, and I'm sure those that are in the construction industry and things like that are a lot more familiar with it as we are. We suffer a lot of loss. Just recently during Coachella, one of the riggers fell and died. It impacts our community tremendously. When you're talking about these documents, you're talking about a document that does not assume common sense is common. And once, by the time you get to that point, the knowledge that's in there is been watered down so much that it seems useless, but there's valuable information in there. Like, for example, gas catches fire. All it takes is one person to not know that or not assume that for it to be a big issue. You know, a rigger, he's been doing it 20 some odd years. OSHA tells you anything above 6 feet, you have to wear a harness, right? He's climbing up 30 feet on the truss, just monkeying up as he did for 20 years. The one time his foot slipped or whatever, and he came tumbling down, fell and lost his life. Now all of a sudden it's a big issue.
Well, that's a real dilemma. You can't become complacent as a manager. Even though you've dealt with these issues your entire time with your company, you may take those for granted because everybody should know. Reality is they're there for a reason. That's to educate all of your folks. And so much like I worked in plants, I worked in construction, there are simple things that you need to communicate. And so some of these things are communicated in written form, and those are your policies and procedures. Your job descriptions are defined that way as well. Some of them will get communicated to on the job verbally. And so and again, this leads more into just holding people accountable, because that's part of your training. When you hire a new employee, you have a new hire orientation process, or you should have, that makes sure you cover all the critical pieces, both from a legal point of view and from a company point of view. Like you probably wouldn't think about it, but my orientation into SCORE, because I'm the manager within SCORE, a volunteer organization, they told me, you know, through the orientation, you do not meet with the press yourself. Sounds simple enough, but hey, why wouldn't the press want to know about, you know, SCORE? You know, it's a good thing. Well, because the national organization wants to control the press and what goes out. The simple things happen. You don't think about it. But last year, and I've been around 7 years, this has never happened before, but we had our big business symposium here in Dallas, invited all you guys as clients to come to it. We gave all these workshops. I had a lunchtime event, much like the Shark Tank. 3 different people presented their companies, and the audience voted on it, and the winner of that particular contest was I'm trying to think, Anger Room. Yeah, Anger Room was her business. She would set up a room. If you had anger issues, you would come into the room and destroy it to help relieve the anger. Yeah, very clever idea. Right? She made a business out of it.
It was all over the news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a month later, she was murdered by her boyfriend who got out of control. Well, SCORE, how does this impact SCORE? I mean, that was sad enough. But National sent me a note, is if something comes up, don't talk to the press yourself. We'll do a press release if they want one. But you don't think about things, right? I never thought much about anything that might happen within SCORE that I'd have to be too concerned about. But in that particular case, hey, we got her a bunch of visibility. It was a great business idea, but then through somebody's anger, ended up killing her. So you never know. So get things written down, communicate, tie your new hire process to your job descriptions and tie them to your policies and procedures or employee handbook. This corrective action process is either in your policies and procedures or in your employee handbook. Now, what it is up to you, okay? You have to determine where your company wants to go, how strict you're going to be, because everybody can be different here. Like I said, some companies can allow drinking on site, but most do not. Texting, tweeting, whatever, working on your computers, on the job, where are you going to be with that, right? Those are some of the issues that you'll have to be faced with. So you have to define, where do I want to stand? And then treat everybody equitably. That's the real trick. Like, taking somebody's cell phone away from them, it's possible to do, but if you set up a policy that says, okay, you'll be warned if you're abusing it, and abuse means you're using the phone at your desk. Okay, you're supposed to be doing your texting, tweeting in the break room or whatever. But if you're caught at the desk, you'll be asked to leave your phone at home at that point in time, or in the car, wherever. But not to have it in the office. You could state that as a policy if you wanted, but then you have to enforce that. So for that particular person, that was the first level of discipline that you enforced. You ask that person to take it. Everybody else is allowed to have their phone, but they've abused it, so you've asked them not to. If you find them again with that cell phone, what's the next? A written reprimand, or a slap on the hand, or termination. See, these are the things that you guys have to determine for your companies. How strict do I want to be?
And then you have to make the time to be aware, to inspect what you expect.
Right.
And if you're not willing to consciously every 30 minutes get out and walk the floor to see who's on the phone or who's not, if you're not willing to do that and set your timer or whatever, then you're going to get a lot of hearsay. Oh, John's always on the phone, but you don't know what that means. You're just hearing that people say he is, or whatever that is. So you have to be willing to set the time to inspect that. And that's the challenge. That's tough for your time, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to spend your time doing these dumb things that they should, right? But you have to do that in the beginning. You have to make sure that you just, like the first 2 weeks of that policy, you were on it, constantly on it.
They're just gonna keep doing it.
And for me, it's just setting my phone, my alarm to get up and go walk around and see this.
Yeah, you have to be consistent.
Yes, it's so hard because you just don't
applying
want to take the time to
whatever
do it.
policies and procedures you have. And that's the piece that you guys, and I'll point the finger at you because you're on that side of the table. I've already had to deal with it and I'm retired, so I don't have to. But you have to enforce that. You have to go tell the person, I'm sorry, this is your second occurrence. I went to the hospital once and told an employee that she has got to make sure she is healthy before she comes back to work, that she has such an absenteeism problem. It's never the last occurrence that gets you terminated. It's the 9 occurrences prior to that, okay? Nobody gets terminated because they were away from work for a day. Right? You build this history up. And so that's what you have to keep in your mind as a manager. I'm not being outrageous here. I'm applying the policies we set, for everybody. And they're not being terminated for the first time. This has been going on for, 3 months now. We've been talking about it. I got a written notification, in their file saying I've warned them, now here's a written notice, and now I'm terminating them. And like Darryl said, they terminated themselves. They chose to disobey.
That's my biggest problem now. My company is 40 years old. It was built with the upbringing of George Strait. George Strait came into being with my company. And so it's always been a small company, and it grew with George. In the past 3 years, we went from 12 employees to what we have now. And a lot of that was what I helped build. And because of it, these people that were family that's been there for 20, 25, 30 years, that, well, if I'm late, I'll pick it up, or I'm not coming in today, but I'll come and make sure later. And all of that stuff stayed. And now I'm in a position of having to go, this is a new era. This is no longer a mom and pop organization. This is a company that needs to be run a certain way. So I'm getting a lot of blowback, and I know that with that is going to mean people are going to leave because they don't like my management style, or they're going to force themselves to do things that they're used to doing that's no longer acceptable. The hard part is getting over that hump.
It is. It's going to be extremely hard on you, and it always is. I mean, if you have family involved in the business, you've got long-term employees, right, that are making it difficult. But again, it boils down to your level of commitment. If you have to sell upper management on your ideas, then sell them on what the corrective action process is, get their buy-off, okay, and then you've got to follow suit. And that may push upper management. They can always override you, but then I might be looking for a job myself. And if they're not going to support me, you need to have total management commitment on it. And so you have to literally go in and adhere to whatever you write down as your policies and procedures. But most importantly, I want you to understand that you all have the flexibility to create your own policies and procedures, okay? Your own corrective action plan. And you can get samples of it, but you write it to your business. Because every business is a little bit different. Components typically of the plan identify the issue. When you're creating this corrective action, you're going to be able to identify very specifically what the person's underperforming or not doing or doing incorrectly, okay? So deal with the facts, not hearsay. But this is what's difficult if some other employee comes in and tells on another employee. Okay, now that's hearsay. That makes it difficult, so you have to be careful with that. You want to use the facts and give dates. Like I said, I used to carry a notebook around. If I saw something, I'd write it down. It may not mean anything, to me, but, in the next 6 months, I see him doing it again. Now I can go back and say, hey, I talked to you on this date about this. Here it's happening again. So be specific with your dates. Define what acceptable behavior actually is. Okay? So not only tell them that they're underperforming, they also have to know what is the standard that you're setting for them. Okay? Don't just tell them they're not doing their job. Tell them, here's what you need to be doing. Okay? And give them examples whenever possible. Set the dates for the tasks to be completed. Typically in a corrective action plan, you're going to tell the person that if they've got a continual problem, say with performance, quantity of output, tell them, okay, here's what I expect over this time frame. So break it down over the next day, the next month, the next year. Here's what you're supposed to be able to get to, and review that with them. And then also also set a date as to when you'll come back and talk to them. Say, you know, I'm not gonna wait 6 more months, you know, let's work on this for 2 more weeks and we'll have another talk. We'll see how you're progressing. You can tell me, are you having problems, you know, accomplishing this for whatever reason? Maybe I, as your manager, can help you with that. You know, I had employees that, and again, it boils down to tardiness, couldn't get into work on time. Well, I sat down with the employee, you know, the employee had children and she needed to take them to daycare, and the daycare didn't open early enough. And I always made her about 15 minutes late. I said, I can solve that problem. We'll set your time for 8:30. You know, she was still late at 8:30.
Okay.
But you as a manager have the capability, flexibility of adjusting things to help them out, right? And so realize you can do that, but be fair, consistent to all your employees. That's the main thing that you have to do, is be consistent to all your employees. And that's hard to do because some employees will rub you the wrong way, and some employees will do everything on time, exactly how you want them to be done. And so you have to be able to monitor that. Your whole action, though, whatever you do, this seems odd. Part of your corrective action process, first step is typically talking to the employee, letting them know there's a problem, right? That's typically the first step of a corrective action plan. I talked to the employee, I informed them what was being done wrong, and I told them, I set a standard for what needs to be corrected. And I told them by when. So I gave them date, how, standard. You should write that down, okay? Even if it's a note to yourself that you put in their file that, hey, here's what I've done. So your second step in this, your corrective action plan should state, if the occurrence does not get corrected within 30 days or 60 days, again, you have the choice. You define 30, 60 days. Action number 2 or consequence number 2 will step in. Meaning I'll bring the employee in, we'll review their performance over the last 30 or 60 days. If the performance is still not adhering, I will escalate the situation to a written warning that goes in their file, or in some cases, the employee might be suspended. Depending what you want to do, it's your corrective action plan. And then typically the third step is the 3 strikes and you're out, which is typically termination. And usually in the second step, I'll never forget this, but the last thing you write down in the employee's written notification of poor performance, if the action is not corrected within this time frame, this could cause further actions up to and including termination. And that's kind of a standard statement that you make.
Can I mention as well that if you're dealing with a union, of course, that has to be totally internalized and documented. Now, most of us in Texas, thank goodness, are not dealing with unions. But I don't know how many of you have had a brush with the TWC, Workforce Commission. Mm-hmm. At the moment, employment is so high, it's not really serious. You know, you fire them, they go out, get another job. 2011, 2012 was a different story. And that has a tremendous impact, what Larry has just gone over, tremendous impact on how good your documentation is. Because they run down to the unemployment office and file for unemployment. The moment they do that, it starts a cascade. You get a letter saying that they've applied, if you're going to contest it or not contest it, and unless you have evidence, which is all the letters that we've been going over, the meetings, the discussions, the final warnings, they will rule against you. The whole system is, I hate to say it, pretty well rigged against the employer.
Yeah.
they always favor the employee's point of view unless you have adequate documentation. So this really and truly, 2019, we're in a good position. Things change. Bear in mind that you need your policies and procedures to be in place so this is institutionalized going forward.
And it does impact you financially when you have to terminate.
Very much so.
Other than all the internal costs of having to rehire and the time that unfortunately you spend trying to correct the employee's performance, the unemployment insurance that you pay is based off the number of people that you terminate. And so the state calculates it. So the more you terminate, the higher your unemployment insurance will go up.
It takes you 3 years to grow out of it.
Yeah.
So you pay that penalty on your total payroll for a 3-year period. And that's money that's deposited back into the fund.
So it does have big impact on it, no doubt about it. So write it down. You might as well start while you're all broke. Well, you're not so small anymore. You've got a lot of people to deal with. But get these processes defined early in life. You know, to try to go back and if you've got a couple hundred employees, man, that's a lot of communication that you got to go through and get everybody associated with it. It can be done.
Yeah.
But again, start now doing it.
Yeah, this whole process for us started, well, with me, you know, this year. You know, I started working on job descriptions in December before I was appointed. 8 months before that, they were saying, well, they've never had a general manager before. So this is all new. So,
Rough.
Yeah. So where you can get these corrective action processes, you don't have to start from scratch. You can go out on the internet. I told you, you can go out and Google corrective action plan template. I've done it, and there's a ton of them out there. We help clients. Part of the mentoring that we do with folks is we help clients, you know, actually write them. You know, you'll write them, we'll read them, we'll give you feedback, and good, bad, or indifferent. And but go out and pull them. Don't start from scratch. HR consulting companies, again, will come in and do these for you. And there's other companies out there like the cooperatives that will help you as well. But it's still your company's, this, you know, the corrective action of your company defines who your company is. I mean, you can, yes, copy somebody else's plan, but this is how you treat your employees. So don't take it too lightly. I mean, you want to be serious and consistent to everybody. And so create a plan, and then it's up to you to make sure that all your managers, whether it's yourself or anybody else, adheres to it. You know, one slip, you know, you created, you know, a terrible, you know, past that will be hard to get over. You know? So anyway. Timely reviews. That's the other piece that you have to do in holding people accountable. I know we kind of dwelled a bit on the corrective action side, but the managing timely reviews, do you all do employee reviews? You do. You in the construction area, you do employee reviews too? Some companies do not, but should. How often do you do reviews? In your case, let's just go around the room. How often, Daryl?
For technicians,
Okay.
for, you know, seasoned, experienced people, I do them bi-yearly.
Okay. So it varies based on position.
Right. New hires, I usually do, I'll do a 3-month review and then another 3-month. And if they're where they need to be, then it'll be 6 months and I'll roll them into a technician.
Our new hires are 90 days and everyone else has been
Yearly, but still, that's fine. Now, again, it's defining what you as a company want to do, you know? And how about yourself?
For employees, we do just new hire 3 months, but subcontractors, we don't really do reviews. Now that I think about
Well, that makes sense. They're not your employee.
it. Yeah.
I'm guessing though with the subcontractors, whoever's responsible for hiring the subcontractor would do contractor reviews with them. And hopefully that the data, the information that is achieved on jobs is fed to that person so that they can review it with them. It's usually like a buyer or somebody like that who's contracting that.
Because I'm over customer care, so what I was suggesting is, because I created a dashboard pretty much to show our complaints that we receive, and I put in the number of complaints per month, over time that we've had the account, so we can see the percentage of how we're doing within that yearly time frame, and then based off the complaint, like what are the issues. So I was trying to kind of say to my boss, which is my uncle, I'm like, we should try to start sending like a monthly document showing them, hey, this is how you're doing. You know, can we improve? But we were like, I don't know if we can do that because they're subcontractors, they're not employees. So like we just never released it. So
Well, you could, again, give that to whoever's,
Rate their performance pretty much.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's a great idea, but just you wouldn't be giving it to the individuals.
Her, whoever GC is, should be giving her a customer satisfaction survey. So then she could be rating their performance as a whole. And you can ask for this.
Yeah, it should be a two-way street there, particularly when you're working with contractors. You work with a lot of contractors as well.
Also contractors. So just a lot of communication with the subcontractor, and whenever we do the contract agreements, we put a small safety policy as well in there too. So they have to carry certain, like the OSHA 10, 30, or per so many employees, one of them has to have OSHA 30, the complicated, stuff like that.
Well, think about it this way. They're not your employees, right? But they are employees of somebody. And so that whoever that somebody is in the contractor's world would probably like to get some feedback because they never see their employees, right? And they would much rather get some feedback on an ongoing basis versus having you come to them and say, we're dropping our contract because all of your employees, really suck and they don't show up on time, they do terrible work and all this good stuff, right? They would like to know it. So think a bit of them as well, and it'll still help your own company. But for your own employees, how often do you review yours?
Every 3 months.
3 months? Oh, that's great.
Wow.
But it takes time, right?
Yeah.
How is that viewed by the management side?
What do you mean?
Well, the amount of time that it takes, is that a problem? Do most managers hate giving reviews?
No, they're fine with that. We're kind of question it if it's not too much, because I think it's important, but the what goes into that actual review. Because what we try, 3 months is it's a lot of time. So we focus much more in giving feedbacks and making people know where they're at on a daily basis. So we created some, every department, they have a whiteboard where we have the main KPIs and everybody's kind of listed there. So we have a visual management. So anyone that walks in the room or in the department can understand where their department is at within their given KPIs. And we try, so that kind of works in kind of auto feedbacking people where they're at. So we're kind of losing the importance of having these every 3 month sessions where we're kind of not clear on what content we're actually discussing at that time. So that's kind of changing, and it's not clear right now where that's going. I don't know if it's too confusing.
Well, I admire companies that try to give an official type of feedback 3 months. It's difficult, But at the same time, I think it can be helpful to the employee, especially if you have an employee population that's ever changing, or technology is changing, or your customers are changing. If there's a lot of change, then that's good to have. So, how about yourself?
This is actually very interesting. So almost a year ago, we had a small employee base and subcontracted the majority of all that we did. So our employees did contract reviews. Well, then right before this, right at the end of the summer last year, we switched to more employee status. So we're right at that 1 year mark. So I'm sitting here batting it around. I took a Citibank course. I talked about 360 review pieces. So I'm going to implement a yearly review because the employees are brought on and have worked with us for a while, so they weren't probationary or new. So I'm sorry, yeah. Long story short, this is interesting. This will be the end of the first year. Our actual employees have been doing regular reviews, and now I'm switching to this whole 360 piece, where they have to gather their own insight and feedback from people they work with. And then when you do the review, there's actually people in the room that give the evaluation as well, and the person can't respond back to it. So this is a cool kind of technique, but ask me in about 5 months how it went.
Well, send me a note. You got my business card.
Yeah.
It's important that, management be committed to this. So, interesting. How,
New hires 90 days.
90 days.
A year.
okay.
Subcontractors is on based on performance as well. Because at the end of the day, they're subcontractors, but they carry our name. So it's very important that we keep a lot of contact with them.
Do you treat subcontractors differently?
No. To our employees?
Right, compared to your other employees doing the same job?
I think I do. I've never thought about it. I try and treat everybody equally the same.
Get the job done.
But I've never really.
Well, this is something that you need to work out with the contractor, the company that you're working with. Like if, because they're not your employees, well, we had a case where one of our contract employees was sexually harassed. Well, is that my responsibility to deal with that issue with the employee, or the contractor who actually hires the employee? And so you have to have this understanding of how far you go. Now, certainly given daily direction as to what has to be done and so forth, that's probably always something you're going to manage. But how far do you go with that? Or say one of your contractors is sexually harassing somebody else on your workforce.
Or if they get hurt.
But doesn't that fall?
Yeah.
Doesn't that fall under what you were saying about having your subcontractors follow the same policies and procedures?
Exactly. And that's why it's really important on the front end when you set up these relationships with your contractors, that you give them copies of your policies, procedures, your manuals, so they know what they have to adhere to. But as far as the actual discipline and stuff of that person goes, that's because they're a contractor, the actual discipline, the corrective action side, has to go to the contracting company. So you want to make that, clear to the people.
Okay.
So anyway.
Yeah, that's like the hard hat rule, right?
Yeah.
Something like that happens. They're no longer allowed on the site.
Yeah, something very simple, but that's a no-no. You get. Now, Stan brought up earlier, and everything we talk about, in holding employees accountable, you got to get into documentation. Either simple notes. You're going to have an employee file. Employees have access to their employee file. So whatever you put in there, assume that the employee can read it. Okay. But put everything in there that you deal with them. So if you counseled them in the past, you certainly, any discipline that you do, you write it out, put it in their file, but document it. But sooner or later, and it might be just the Workforce Commission, because you did terminate the person, comes and contacts you and wants to know what happened. Because employees will actually get penalized if they're terminated for just cause. You have to be able to show that it was just cause. Right? And that's where the Workforce Commission wants to see your documentation. Question?
In an employee's file, can we put just observations throughout the day? I have a piece of paper that at the end of each day, I just jot down notes from the day. And it might be meetings that I had, it might be, you know, that had nothing to do with my employees, it might be just things I've observed. But it seems like, you know, everyone's in their own role today, just a general statement. And sometimes it's specific statements that I'm observing about an employee as I'm thinking about how to talk to them about a specific, you know, just before I can go talk to them about a specific action I've seen they're taking that's not right, I'm observing it and kind of documenting it. And I have that on this sheet of paper, but is that something kind of does observations in the file?
It's kind of up to you. The employee has access to their employee files. They can see it anytime they want. So I wouldn't suggest putting anything in there that you don't want them to see, because they do have access to it. That's why I carried a little notebook that I could write my observations down. I kept that with my personal notebook.
Those things don't have to be disclosed.
They don't have to be in the employee file.
Okay, that's, I guess.
But anything in the employee file
Okay.
must or is available to the employee.
Okay.
Yeah, but those notes that you're talking about as far as for corrective action comes under those counseling sessions.
Right, I
Yes,
understand
And
that.
then that
Yeah.
becomes.
So that would be in-
record and
that
goes
would be
to
Right,
the
I
file.
understand. But I'm keeping those until it gets to the
You know,
conversation.
it sounds stupid, but I manage large warehouses, and if I saw somebody, you know, large warehouse with pallets, forklifts driving all over the place, you know, pieces of pallets fall off, shrink wrap is laying around. Sometimes I'd be walking around and I'd see an employee who it wasn't their job to clean up, pick up that pallet that has a nail sticking out of it or something, throw it in the trash. You know, I tend to write a note down, you know, say something, you know, to the employee about that. But that was kind of those little extra things that when it came time for a review, you had all these great things to, you know, tell the employee that, hey, I also saw all these things that you did. You know, I also saw you running, you know, which is a no-no, you know, in a warehouse too, you know. But you have those notes. But yeah, anything that you want to put in the employee file, the employee has access to. So make sure the employee knows when their review dates are. You're wise if you get the employee to do a review on themselves while you do the same review. So if you've got certain criteria, and in production type of jobs, you usually have a variety of things on the quantity, the quality, you know, all these types of things that you can measure, that you're going to evaluate them on. Have them rate themselves. But there are some subjective things that you end up rating employees on. You know, ability to work with fellow teammates, right? You know, so what's your criteria for that? So you want them to give you input too. How do you think your ability is? You know, why do you sit by yourself in the lunchroom? You know, nobody else will work with you, right? Figure out what you can do to get the employee to give you feedback as to how they think they're doing. I found that very effective to have them do a review, and they used the same sheet I did, same criteria, and I did a review. And then we put them both down on the table at the same time, and everything that we agreed, we had a numbering system at that time, 1 to 5, how we rate. Everything we agreed on, we didn't have to talk about. It was only the areas that we differed. Why do I think that you're poor at this and you think you're really good at this? And we could talk about those subjects. Okay? So the measurable ones, though, should be pretty easy because they should know how they're doing as well as you. You should be 100% accurate on that.
Reviews, the 360 review that you mentioned, Justin. In a huge corporation, we had about 40,000 people. So it was formalized to the nth degree, and you had a personnel person come in and sit with you. But the 360 reviews we found were a total disaster.
Okay. Yeah. I was asking in 5 months.
Yeah. from the
Why is that?
angle of nitpicking and people getting even for a supposed slight 3 months before, so they try and sink you. And the best system we ended up with was a 2-stage.
Okay.
So it's a review by your immediate supervisor and by his supervisor. So there was a break on the system, so that if you didn't get on with your boss, there was still a hope that his boss would not allow a particularly bad review. Plus, statistically, we were only allowed to rate across 40,000 people something like 3% as above average or something. So statistically, they watched it because you'll find the person doing the review, if they are uncertain, will tend to rate very high. And when this is tied to salary, which we did, if you were rated well above average, you were entitled to about double the salary increase of the average. So as a 4% average, you might get 8. Now, going from that to a small company of 9 people, I went on to a quarterly system, tied it to bonus. So every quarter they knew the first week of the new quarter, they received, in some cases, a double check or even a triple check. And my experience was that tying it that way had the best result, because if you give them an extra $20 a week, it's not even gasoline money, it just disappears. But if you give them a lump sum of $500 or $1,000, it has impact. And we found much, much better results working that way in a small environment where you're able to sit down, define the objectives, which is always that the corporation makes money and everybody's happy in it. And then you have an immediate impact. And again, I use the big corporation system. The person who made the largest contribution to the overall profitability got about double what the person that just showed up got. So just as a suggestion. But the 360-degree, I have very, very great doubts about.
And this is good to hear. I mean, we did it for 2 reasons, but the one I can bring out here in this conversation is the ones that we're bringing in to do these jobs are so specific that we wanted some kind of peer evaluation piece, because,
Right,
like you're saying, the twofold piece, they wouldn't know the nitty-gritty of that job detail specifically. Here, I'll unpack a little bit. So, man, if you got a teacher out of campus with a lot of kids that are like high special needs, for example, it's an incredibly difficult job. The person who's directing that, right, their supervisor, may not realize all the things that go into that one class. They may see 5 kids. So that's why we thought like a peer evaluation piece. So maybe my question is this: do you have any input on how you can understand more of what happens nitty-gritty piece and get the insight that way through a 2-stage?
not really in that specific situation. That's a tough one. But you need a break on the system,
Okay.
that your immediate supervisor can't sink me.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because he doesn't like me, or I went out with his wife or something like that. So he
Things happen.
yeah, which happens. You need that break on the system.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
But
Sorry,
getting your communication is so much a part of your job as managers, right? You have to understand what your employees are doing well and what they're not doing so well. You got to figure out what's the best method to acquire that information. Now, management by roaming is the way I used to do it. I used to get around and talk to the peers of other people, how well are they working with them, so that I would at least have feedback. If I could get that feedback, even though I wouldn't necessarily name that other employee, saying that they did a great job or a poor job. I could say, your peers are saying this about you. You know, in this case, you and somebody didn't accomplish this, you know, you're working on. But again, it's getting down to that detail and finding out, getting out, talking to the employees and talking to the peers, understanding your workforce. You know, you're going to set these policies and procedures, create your own corrective action plan if needed. But in general, you as a manager have to be committed. If you're going to hold your people, that's what this whole thing's about, is holding your people accountable. You have to be committed, which is the last piece I want to talk about. And that, what do I need to do? Okay. First of all, be timely. I told you earlier, don't wait to give praise. You know, at the same time, don't wait to criticize. If something happened today, don't wait a month. Okay. Don't wait for that review to come up. Make note to that individual that something did go very well today, and you want to thank them for it. And the same certainly if something went wrong. You can always, I mean, tell the person today that, hey, they were in violation of so-and-so. Here's the fact, here's how you're supposed to handle it, and I'll get back to you tomorrow or the next day. We'll go through, this is part of our corrective action process. We'll have to sit down and talk about it. You can always do that, but tell them right then and there. And this is the second point here. Be willing to implement the worst case scenario. You know, and unfortunately, that's the fire, demote, send home, to reduce the pay. That's your worst case. And if you can't do the worst case, you know, then you're incomplete. Now, some companies set it up knowing that their managers can't deal with this piece of having to do the worst case scenario. So who do they have do it? HR. That's why I got out of HR. Now, Ross and Green was that way. HR was the one that terminated. I got all the paperwork from the managers. Here's all the reasons as to why you're being terminated. And HR ended up being the fall guy, you know, to have to tell somebody. But part of it was to keep, because it was so severe, you know, losing your job, they wanted to eliminate conflict on the floor between the manager and an actual employee. So, but you can do that, but I didn't hear anybody have an HR department?
We just hired online.
Well, they're probably going to help you more with your documents and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, they probably won't hire an employee for you.
Well, apparently they're like sending this resignation letter. It's like for one of our operation managers, we had he ended up quitting, but I don't know. We just started using them, so I'm still trying to get used to it. Yeah. Do you have experience?
No, I'm gonna go check them out.
So let me ask each of you, and it's rhetorical, but you know, can you take a look at all of your employees and honestly say, I'd be willing to fire any one of them? That's what I'm talking about here, worst case. And hopefully you can say yes to that, because you know that you're not going to fire them unfairly. You're going to follow whatever guidelines your company puts in place. And you're not firing them. Just like Daryl said, get back to the point is they are terminating themselves for just cause. All you're doing is implementing, you know, the final action. So as you're doing this commitment with management, stick to the facts. This hearsay stuff is very difficult to deal with. A lot of times the issues will be between multiple employees. Anybody have a policy that says no fighting in the workplace? Anything like that? Hey, I did in manufacturing environment. Truly, we had no fighting. Fighting, you know, ended up being
Gasoline burn.
gasoline burns, yeah. But you had to tell people that you know, fighting. Well, when it comes down to gathering the facts, see, this is where it becomes difficult. You're the manager in between, right? two people were fighting, it gets broke up, but, you know, they finally got the manager, you know, to break it up. How do you know who started what? Who's gets
Camera.
blamed? See, this is the difficult piece, so you've got to try to stick to the fact. The hearsay becomes very difficult. The fact is, there is a policy that says no fighting. Now, your only chance of hope of saving one of the employees is he laid there, you know, I assume it's a guy, laid there and just got beat, you know, seriously, never threw a punch, you know? But the reality is you're probably going to terminate both. You know? So, but stick to the fact, because the fact is both of them were involved in an altercation on the floor. Doesn't matter who started it. Right? Be honest and sincere with your employees, you know, with good and the bad, and they can sense that from each of you. And so you'll build a reputation, right? You know, in your workplace, you know, where you really come down. Will you tell them exactly what you're feeling? You know, the facts of their employment. You know, what they're doing performance-wise. Or do you sugarcoat everything, or do you avoid the confrontation? Trust me, your employees can read you pretty quickly, and they know if you will avoid confrontation, they can take it to the nth level. And they will. Certain employees will just take it that far. I like this next to last bullet, which is if the company is willing to show that they're willing to help the employees. Like I said, it's a two-sided sword when you go into this thing. You as a company need to recognize good performance. You need to be there to help them improve, you know, on their poor performance areas. You're not there to terminate. You're there to assist them. You would like them to advance as high up in the company as they want to go. And so your job as a manager, and they'll be able to read that from you and the company in general. And this is where how many of you are sole owners of your company? So there's half of you here. The company's image is important, okay? And you as the manager are creating that image for what the company is willing to do. So if there's an opportunity, you know, for a new position, you'll make a decision. Do I hire from within, or do I go outside the company? And let's say I go outside the company. Will your employees understand why you did that? Or will they see that as you passed me over for a job that I might not be qualified for to begin with, or have all the skill set? And so set an image for your company and for yourself as a manager. Show them that you're there to help them. I'm here to help. That's what SCORE does, right? I'm here to help. What's your question? But you need to be there too. You know, if the employees come to you and they ask you, like the employee needed to simply come in 15 minutes later, she could be there on time. As a manager, I was willing to make that accommodation for her. No problem. Now, the fact that she disregarded that and still came in late, that was her problem, you know. But at least I was willing to give to try to help them. And then your reward. Do any of you have reward systems in your company? Bonus plans, anything?
I do have a little excellence recognition, because I discovered that I was telling people a lot about what they were doing wrong. And so I just created these little cards that I can write. You did a really good job on this, and I can give it to them and say you did a really good job on this, and then I ask them to post it by their workstation, so that every day they see all the good things that they did, so that if I to come back and say you really screwed this up, that I can still feel like they're being affirmed.
Yeah, and that's what you want to do.
Do you hand a lot of those out?
I really try to do like 4 or 5 a week if I can. Sometimes it's 1 or 2. It just kind of depends on what projects we have going on. And what, especially if a customer says, because I have installers who go on site, your people were really great, they did a good, I right away give them one. Anytime the client gives me feedback.
I handle it a little different. What I do is during our logistics meetings. I would get all the managers to go in, and there's a criteria of what that is. And the criteria is basically, how did you represent on stage? I mean, doing your job is par. Doing an exceptional job at your job is par. What did you do to add value service to our clients? What did you do outside of your job to reflect positively with the clients? And I have all the managers come together and we vote on it once a month. Ironically, I have one of those in about 3 hours. And we vote on that person. That person gets the newsletter saying this person won the award and what their write-ups were, because everybody has to write something based on this person. And they're awarded either a gift card or a half-day paid time off.
Good system.
It's the easiest way I can do it. I'm looking for other ideas, but that's what I came up with for now. And so it's a monthly thing. And there's a lot of people that do a really good job, but bringing value-added service. Everybody in our business is A-type personnel. So everybody's hair is on fire and everybody's go, go, go. But the person that can actually reflect a positive image to our clients is the people that I really want to recognize, because that's the seed that continues our growth.
What's very important, if you have a reward system, have it well defined. You know, it needs to be measurable. And then if it's achieved, you have got to honor it. Okay? You know, you can't have the management team go, oh man, everybody made that this month. Well, that's your fault. You didn't set the goal, you know. You're, like Earl was saying, you know, standard performance should not be rewarded. Okay? Over and above standard is what you're looking for. So, you know, but if everybody hit the goal that you set, you need to honor everybody. Just don't say, hey, we'll rethink this next month. You come up with a new one. Okay, so honor those. And do come out with some type of rewards, you know, for your people. It's very, very simple to do. We're about here at the end. What I really want you to understand, you know, in the whole process of holding people accountable, it's not a straight line. It's not a linear process at all. It's evolving. It continually is moving, and your job as the manager is to be able to keep up with this. And so we talked about the job descriptions in general. Okay, that's a great place to start. You're going to define your process and procedures as well. So from there, you'll set your goals and your KPIs. Your corrective action plan is in place. You hope you never have to use it, right? You got commitment from management, and there's time. Well, that's constantly spinning because all these things will change. Your business evolves from day to day. You can change those KPIs. You can change, like we talked about, those job descriptions. And with that, everything else has to get modified. Okay? And so understand that I don't even know what they call this point right here in the middle. What you're really trying to search for is making sure your employees have authority, accountability, and responsibility. That's the end result if you hold them accountable. And so keep those things in mind. Make sure that you create, you know, and start with those job descriptions. You know, people think this is a miracle thing if we can hold people accountable. It's not. It's pretty common standard business stuff. Do a good job description, create measurable goals, you know, have a process in place to either reward or correct behavior, make sure management supports it, you know, and everything's done in a time frame. Okay? That's really what we're all about. And again, that's said a whole lot easier than to do it. It takes a lot of work on your part. So with that said, the two most common pieces of a business that get outsourced, the HR component tends to be one of them, okay? And HR and marketing are the two. And they get outsourced because of having that skill set internal to your company is hard. You start out small as a company, you're a generalist, right? You wear every single hat. But at a point in time that you start gaining more and more employees, the HR related issues become greater and greater. And so you need somebody to have that expertise. So there are plenty of HR consulting groups out there that you can kind of pick and choose the services you want from. And I would suggest doing it. If you don't have policies and procedures or an employee handbook, go talk to one of them. And they can modify one for you. It'd be a set amount of money, but it gets you started. The same with, the Corrective Action. They've got tons and tons of examples they can modify for you. So it needs to be done though. That's the whole point. That if you're not going to do it, get somebody else to do it. Have the company pay for it. But it does need to be done. People do not leave jobs. People leave other people. And so if you're a poor manager, you have high turnover or whatever, look at yourself in the mirror. Okay, is it me? And sometimes it really is. So you got to manage them right. So Stan and I are going to stick around for a little while. I'm willing to answer any questions everybody has as a group, but I'll be sticking around. I've got an afternoon workshop with them as well. But we're done. Any questions anybody has?
Thank you. Good.
Yes.
Well,
Helpful.
I do want to pay you for your time at some point.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? Like,
I mean, I
do we go back
signed it
online? or-
expecting to pay,
want me
so.
to pass a cup of things up?
No cost.
You better write down your contribution.
I owe you.
Well, I mean, if you would like to pay, if you have a check, you make it out to SCORE.
Okay.
If we didn't have billing on our
So,
website.
yeah.
Can we get a link?
I thought
Yeah.
there was an email sent
Yeah.
with them.
We can just repeat the email essentially with an invoice.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, I can do that.
I
I can do that. I'll have to create another event.
But our main objective is not the income.
Yeah.
Our main objective is to give you the opportunity to sit down with people who've done that. And that's my big hang up with HR consultants or something. They may have had some experience, but it's so narrow that it's not always appropriate to my problem. And just to reiterate, the 40-pager, if you don't have it as a job description or as a company manual, go get one. And we ended up paying about $2,000 to ADP or one of the payroll companies, and they just spew this boilerplate language off of the computer. You can do it today. Just go to Google and Google a company manual and use your word processor and change it and save yourself the $2,000. But having said that, I love Larry's approach. And that is that to me, the short-term KPI is absolutely critical. And it's constantly moving. And how let's put it this way, your success as a manager is going to depend on how well you keep up with that. And the one final thought is always the triangle that we were taught. And that is, if you're on the left and the employee is on the right, find a common objective that you both agree on. Because if your criticism is seen as nitpicking or petty, you immediately lose credibility. But if you can look for that common objective, which is always there, Myra, it's that we stay in business. That's the common objective. You don't get paid for turning up to work for 5 days. You get paid for not doing the minimum, but I love your system of where you actually look and compensate and recognize the exceptional work outside of the norm. But think through and look for that objective, and then the rest of it, like all this management stuff, tends to be fairly obvious and self-evident and extremely difficult.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. Anybody staying for the second one?
What is the second
What is
one?
it?
Planning, it wouldn't make sense for most of you because you're all in business, but planning the success for your future business. A little bit different.
Sure. And if you give me your cards, I'll run a check on your website.
Okay, all right.
With pleasure.
We appreciate that.
No, it certainly doesn't. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Installer, he's using the company, which is the installation.
Yeah.
And then he's.
Need the cards. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And sometimes
Card.
they're like, well, yeah, or they call
I
me.
got a card for
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you very much for your time.
You're
welcome.
Look,
You
you cannot-
value us.
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, I should have some insights that I'm thinking back. Let's work on it.
You have my card. The phone number is wrong though. My Google number collapsed. Thank you very much.
Well, you can stick it over 40 years.
Any comments? Yeah.
Yeah.
Value out of it?
I did, yeah.
Okay. I work with a lot of corporations.
Have a great day.
You too.
Now, he doesn't have to.
Yes.
It's no more than this.
So you can differentiate the different types
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
I'll send you all an email.
Oh, and thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
So, okay, so just defining a different policy for why.
Something like this, I'm thinking like, yeah, it's gonna be the same thing.
Thank you for that, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And I
it's a
appreciate the
touchy-
feedback, like that probably isn't a very, because I was kind of sensitive, like, I'm having a hard time implementing this. And that was just confirmation, yeah, you are gonna have a hard time because you can't.
I've been through too many of them. No, my wife was a provider for corporations.
So you tend to get somebody who comes
Cell
out of
phone
college
calls.
that's done nothing but HR.
Get ready for employees.
Get to a
Everybody has
discussion
that
like
cell
this,
phone
you
anymore,
know,
sitting there on the desk. and we can sit
Has
text
30
them.
or 40 years experience.
Are they on it?
What to do.
Well,
Yes.
come in, just have to come up with
And my standard
policy.
joke
No
is,
cell phones,
my
you know,
daughters and my
on
wife never
lab
listen.
benches. And
But
they have to
in
do-
business, everybody has to listen.
Okay,
Or
so I
at
wouldn't be
least make it
unreasonable,
look
it's also
like
like,
they
am I
listen.
gonna chase my inflation away, right, they're gonna go find another job somewhere else, well, other companies are doing the
But
same
it's
thing.
not-
so-
Well, that's why,
It-
you know,
it's
I would Google policy.
Really, it's tough.
Things are changing. The
In
moment
those early stages.
You know, my wife says when she goes to work, every single person,
And that was us about 7 years ago.
every single person down in the lunchroom is on their phone. They're not doing it, so.
We lose control.
you know,
It's so
that-
much
They
easier to
survive
pick
that
up a
way,
trash
you know,
can.
the younger generation. We were at the movie theater.
But you are your
the other
full
day.
efficient.
My wife and
That together.
And
So
again,
there was a younger audience in there as well. As soon as that movie ended, all these lights start flashing. Everybody's checking their own cell phones. We're still in the theater, you know? Can't wait.
Yeah,
Something must have important happened in this world.
it was kind of eye-opening to hire someone like him and then just, you know, just like first thing out of the box, we were in a meeting, he's like this, I just like never, Gen Xers is like, we don't do that, nobody does that, who does that?
Nobody does that.
I was gonna, I wanted to say, as far as.
And if you recognize that,
Rick, Bill, if you're still on here, goodbye, thank you, I'll call you separately.
As you move up in whether it's concert or go catch the element.
I'm willing to share it if you.
Oh, yeah,
Your success.
absolutely.